Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Knowledge Management Community of DC March 2021 monthly meeting. And we have a wonderful presentation for you tonight. Jamie Muskopf is going to be talking about what's so radical about communityship in knowledge services. And we have been on a conversational leadership community meeting series that we've been doing because last month we had John Hovell and Donita Volkwijn speak about conversational leadership, and Jamie is going to round us out. And I love the word radical. So this is very enticing, but I really love I love that we're doing these series to try and give you ideas, and we keep building on each other. So thank you for coming, and I hope you have a great time, and I'll hand it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Tara. So thanks for coming. And absolutely, this is meant to be sort of a continuation of the conversation that John and Donita had last month, and definitely rounds out our conversation about communities from different perspectives in knowledge management and knowledge services. And I'm very purposefully using the word knowledge services, so I'm glad that Guy is here.
Thank you.
But before I begin, especially because this is a really small group, I'm going to ask a question. How are we? And I'm stealing this sort of way of asking the question, how are we, from a student of ours. I am an associate at Columbia University School of Professional Studies in the Information and Knowledge Strategy program. And we just finished teaching a course on navigating the future of work. And one of our students was invited to try, starting us off one day, and then we ended up doing it every day by asking the question, how are we doing? So what I'd like to do is go around, and it's pretty straightforward. You're being asked to give a number on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being outstanding, I'm feeling excellent, to 1 being not so great. And then I'm going to add a little bit of an addition, which is you can decline to state. That wasn't an option before, but 0 or 1 to 10, 10 being the best. How are you feeling? You don't need to share anything else than that, and you can decline to state. So I'm going to start with Tara.
Okay. All right. The thing is, I'd say I'm a 10 because I'm here. That is why. That has basically just boosted me up to a 10. And that is how I just get so much energy when I'm talking about KM, and when I'm doing it, when I'm helping people learn about it. And so, regardless of any physical or I'm a 10. And
Awesome.
And you can all go, yeah, right. That's okay. But I'm happy to be here.
Yay. All right. How about you, Bill? Glad you're back.
I'm going to give it a 7. It's been a pretty, a lot. I just want some more sleep. I think that's the biggest thing. And I was in a staff meeting today and almost fell asleep in front of my boss, so that wasn't good. But luckily I had the camera off. Yeah, it's been kind of a fascinating week. I've been taking this training on learning transfer, which is really great, but I have to get up at 3:15 because they're on Vienna time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just my sleeping patterns are all out of whack right now.
I understand.
So.
What about you, Ivan? Now you're in the wilderness.
Numerically 5, maybe. So we're going through a complete transformation of our organization. So if you can imagine spending years, I've been here 17 years, pushing, pimping KM, and then the organization is completely reinventing itself. And on top of that, within the last within the year, we've flipped from WebEx to Teams, CVR, which is the DoD Teams, to Team for Education, to 360 MS, to all of our technology is flopping. So it's required somebody like me. I've had to provide training on all these platforms, but I'm not an IT guy. So if you can imagine doing your job and all of a sudden you may completely be different in a year.
Mhm.
So that's pretty, it's struggling to keep up with the technology and just a transformation effort.
Thank you for sharing that, Ivan.
Sure.
Julianne, how about you?
Hang on, am I, can you hear
Yes.
me? Okay.
Yes.
I think 7, it's been the day ended up on a very high note. So, but there's been challenge. So I think that's challenges with, there's family situations I'm contending and navigating on behalf of others. But on the professional side, I got to do a podcast today before I got on this call and show up here. So I was just thinking, like, the days are very interesting because there's a big yin and yang of who I show up in the different rectangles lately. So I think I'm learning to appreciate the moment much more than ever. When you get a good thing happening, just live with it for a few minutes. The ability to smile and chat and laugh and learn something else. So thank you. And I love this question because I ask usually clients, what's giving you energy, or what's keeping you what's keeping you busy, basically. Because I'm always, how you are, Tessa, how's your day going? It's so loaded lately because people are contending with so much. And we could be laughing one minute and crying with somebody else the next minute lately. So it's just a lot of shifts and turns. So I think that's a beautiful question to ask.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. John?
Sure. Thank you, Jamie. And yep, a lot like Julianne. Thanks for asking. And you've given me time to consider it, so thank you. Like Tara, 10, but with the caveat of intellectually, I'm a 10. And to be here and to be breathing, and in that perspective, 10. If I'm more honest with you, I guess I would say emotionally, I appreciated when Ivan said 5. I was teetering between 4 and 6, and thought, all right, so maybe I'll say 5. And then with Tara saying 10, I thought I'm going to go 5.5. I'm going to think positive. But yeah, a lot like Julianne was saying, I resonated with, there's a lot going on, and love our clients, love the work we do, but it is very challenging, emotional work, and today was no different.
Thank you. Guy, how are you?
New boy on the block. And listening, I'm like you, John. I'm really excited to have heard what people were saying, and I could sort of get myself in shape. I've been prepared to say something. Tara, I'm right there with you. Intellectually, what's happening in my professional life, all that sort of thing, it's definitely up at a 10. And I'm so glad you asked the question. I'm going to have to remember this for some of the work I'm doing. I'm at 10. It's not all a 10 though, John, you got it. We have, Ivan, like you, I do not consider myself a quote technologist, unquote. And without giving away any, without going too far, I reached a point in my life, not my career, but my life, just age. There's certain things I get stuck in, technologically speaking, and then I find myself slipping down to a 7, maybe even a 6, but I hope not. On the other hand, okay, I've had my 2 vaccinations. I'm past the period for getting ready, and I'm ready. I guess I'm sort of like a 4 or a 5. I'm so lonesome. I miss society so much because I'm a very gregarious person and I want to get out with people. And so that'll happen. We'll get there. I know it there, but okay. So you asked a very simple question. You got 3 answers: a 10, a 5 or a 6, or 5, whatever. But you asked, so thank you very much for asking. I love this conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you all for sharing. And I just want you to know I absolutely honor where all of you are at this point. I'm appreciative of the fact that you shared so openly with all of us how you were feeling, and that you're also willing to listen to how everyone else was feeling. I think that that's something that I heard through all of your comments was that, you know, we're all sort of missing people and you know, going through the ups and downs of working with people and without people. So I hope that you all know that I'm carrying everything that you've shared with me as we go along. I know that when we have presentations and the person that's up in the front, you know, the sage on the stage idea, you know, that's certainly not where I want to be today, especially on this topic about communityship. So if at any time I say something and you have a question, or you just want me to pause or whatever it is, definitely feel free to, you know, jump in. It's a small enough group, and I love that you're also open and willing to share. So we'll
Jamie, how are you doing? How are
yes,
you
thank
doing?
you. Thank you for asking. I'm about an 8 because I have this terrible dental thing going on right now. I made the very bad mistake of not removing all of my wisdom teeth when I was younger. So now I have this very evil wisdom tooth in my mouth that's causing me problems and headaches and lack of sleep. So I finally broke down and have to go have it surgically removed, hopefully on Monday if it's not too complicated. So yeah, it's a little bit, I just feel exhausted because, as you know, having something throbbing in your head isn't all that great. But that said, though, I feel the fact that I'm able to be here and present and with you and doing this, I absolutely feel a 10 about that.
Jamie,
but
if
yes.
it make you feel a little better, I've been dealing with one of these mouthworks issues for now 15 months.
Oh,
And it's going to be resolved. Well, it's been up and down, but it's going for lots of different reasons. But tomorrow morning at 10:20, it's going to be fixed.
oh,
So you can call me on Sunday and say, Guy, did you make it through? And I can give you the most encouraging response. We're going to get there.
thank you,
Boy,
Guy.
that's specific as far as our numbering thing is concerned.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, and then I'll say I'm a 10 too, because tomorrow I get my first COVID vaccine shot, which I didn't expect to be able to get. So very excited. Some of you know, my mother lives in Hawaii and has a very advanced dementia, and Hawaii has very strict rules about coming to Hawaii in the first place. So having the vaccine is going to be really helpful for me to be able to visit and, you know, just go travel there to see my mom, who I haven't seen for almost 3 years now. So yeah. So I'm feeling good about that. That is at me in a happier place. All right. So all right, back to conversational leadership and these beautiful people on my screen here, who I had to share because I definitely wanted to mention that they're having another conversational leadership workshop, which I think Guy is going to, right? And John and Donita and David will be there and Sally will be there. So I think it'll be a phenomenal workshop. But if you weren't able to attend last month and aren't familiar with conversational leadership, I'm going to just basically share the David Gertine definition of conversational leadership, which is that it is about appreciating the extraordinary but underutilized power of conversation, recognizing that we can all practice leadership and adopt a conversational approach to the way in which we live and work together in an increasingly complex world. I think that definition is very succinct, but it also is much more complicated than that, I think, as we talked about last time with John. And so I wanted to really start off by telling the story that last summer, and Guy was there too, I attended a conversational leadership workshop. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is kind of how I felt. I felt completely at first just not incapable. Like I don't know how else to say it. I felt like I came, I showed up, I'm going to learn something, and then I really learned something. I really learned a lot of things, and I wasn't prepared for it. I definitely thought it was just going to be a standard learning experience, and it absolutely wasn't. And so, you know, I would say that there were a lot of learnings that came out of the conversational leadership workshop for me. But one of them, the first one was that, you know, a lot of conversational leadership is heavily dependent on how you as an individual show up to have conversation, and the ability you have to create space for other people in conversation. I think this is probably one of the deepest learnings and takeaways of that. And, you know, why I'm going to share these learnings with you is because they really led up to this sort of evaluation of what is community overall? What does that mean? And what does it mean? Like, how am I showing up in community? And what is conversational leadership as it relates to this thing called communityship, which I'll talk about in a second. But this is really what I felt like. I felt unprepared. I felt like, you know, I was showing up in ways that I didn't realize I showed up to conversation, which was really needing a structure, really needing things that I wasn't able to adequately communicate, and I really wasn't 100% consciously aware that I needed. So the experience kind of led me to really realize, okay, this is how I'm showing up in conversation, and other people show up in different ways. And am I prepared as a person who's in this group, in this workshop, collectively trying to learn? Am I prepared to allow for their, you know, beings to be as they are, you know, to show up as they are. So, and that kind of led me to this thought, like, you know, at the end of the workshop, which was, and really, you know, if it's a really important battle, you need to leave your blasters at home. Because I had this great, I had this kind of linkage, because I thought about this image here, you know, this, I'm sure everybody's familiar with Star Wars and, you know, these great battles in the movie Star Wars. And I had a wonderful, like probably one of the most incredible, passionate professors ever. When I was an undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara, his name was Frank McConnell. He passed away in 1999, but he was very famous. He taught an English course in science fiction literature. And one of the things he did was sort of break apart and apply different frameworks to these science fiction works that we were all familiar with. And one of the things he really talked about was this idea that in Star Wars, you know, they've got laser guns, right? Everybody's shooting each other throughout most of the movie. When it comes time for these epic battle scenes, the big scenes between good and evil, the real big things that matter, they don't use laser guns. They use these swords. And so he talked a lot about how, you know, Star Wars is sort of like Camelot in space, you know, the idea of the noble implement that you bring to battle when something is exceptionally important. And I thought a lot about the fact that when we are in conversation and when we're in conversational leadership, it's not about showing up with your best conversational skills and, you know, making sure, you know, and because we all come thinking all these different ways that this is how we facilitate, this is how we lead. But it's more about, you know, understanding that when you approach, you know, you sort of bring your gentlest, kind of most vulnerable self and your most vulnerable tools to the table, and, you know, and prepare yourself in that way. So to me, I thought, I walked away feeling like the most important conversations that we need to have need to be managed carefully and need to be done engaged in carefully, not just with guns ablazing, I guess. So there's a guy I know. So what in the world does this have to do with knowledge services, right? If we're talking about conversational leadership and you know, we're talking about how we're showing up in conversation. So, you know, Guy has this wonderful series of books about knowledge services. And the definition that I have of knowledge services is that It is an approach to knowledge sharing that converges information management, knowledge management, and strategic learning into a single enterprise-wide discipline. And so, it's more than knowledge management, it's more than information management. And what I love about it is the emphasis on learning. Because really, if you think about how people learn things and how we teach things, it's such a social engagement, right? It involves a whole lot of conversation. It involves a lot of relationship management. And so, to me, I think there are so many intangible things that come along with doing knowledge services, being a knowledge strategist, and they absolutely involve conversational leadership. And they also deserve to, because of the social aspect of it, because of this idea of us connecting people and information through conversation comes up, I thought I needed to go a little bit deeper in understanding what communityship was and what the expectation was of communityship, because this is a concept that comes up in conversational leadership. And we talked a little bit about it last time. So what is communityship? So this is Henry Mintzberg and David Gertine and John and Donita. They definitely reference his work in terms of communityship. What does that mean? At first introduction, I think there was a big sort of misunderstanding, I guess, although it's not too far off, that communityship meant just shared leadership, right? So instead of thinking as, there's one person that does all the leading and everybody else sort of follows along, it's this idea that everybody has a place and a function as a leader and can serve as a leader in community. But after looking a little bit deeper at the definition, one of the things he mentions, Harry Mintzberg, is that communityship is not the democratization of businesses or leadership. So to me, that means, okay, so it's not about just shared leadership. In reality, it's leadership at all levels that's consciously more humane and consciously more respectful. And these things seem very simplistic to me when I look at it that way. But if we really think about it, how many times do we enter conversations in a professional setting thinking, be more humane, be more respectful? How often do we consider those things? And aren't those things really necessary in order for us to engage in conversation with one another that's more than respectful, but, and also just productive and, more than just one person listening to another. It's everyone kind of listening to each other and getting value and giving value from each other to each other. But this idea of making things more humane really resonates with me because my doctorate is in social work after a 20-year career in technology and knowledge management. And the reason I ended up going in that direction is because working as a business consultant, I constantly ran into the situations of, I can create the best plans, I can create the best strategies and lay them all out there and step by step tell someone, this is what needs to be done. And they can look at it and just toss it out the window and it crushes me. But really what crushes me about it is the fact that, there's reasons why people disregard advice about that involves how they should engage with other people. And certainly when we talk about knowledge strategies, one of the things that we do talk about is how do you manage your people? How are you helping people? How are we connecting people? And those were always the portions of the strategies that I put together that were really more overlooked than anything else. Everybody just wants to skip to the technical solution. Everybody just wants to, what is the thing I can plug in that's going to help me? Because the people part is the hardest part. And so I wanted to go into, I found out about this Doctor of Social Work program at USC. And I thought, okay, here's a group of people who for decades now, especially in the United States, have been trying to solve really big problems, not just problems, not that they're not big, but, in the knowledge services sphere, I think we're dealing with problems like, how do I organize my information, and how do I get people to use the portal, and how do I get people to do this or that? You know, I'm talking about huge problems like, how do we end homelessness? how do we end inequity? How do we harness technology for social good? You know, these really large questions. And so to me, I feel like, okay, the third learning that I had from being in that conversational leadership space is that, you know, if the world is going to become, and it is, increasingly reliant upon collaboration and sharing and working together, those of us in the fields related to knowledge services that are sort of shaping and convening communities of practice need to show up in a different way. We need to lead up in a different way. And working in knowledge management is certainly a challenge for most practitioners, but it's necessary to doing an effective job at really getting people not just to organize their information, but to really gain value from it and share it in ways that are impactful and powerful beyond just the standard bottom line. I think everyone in this room has seen the power of collaboration, and I think all of our organizations have benefited from it when it's actually worked and it's been done well. So radical, I'm glad that Tara said that she liked the word radical. So, here I am, okay, I go from conversational leadership workshop to thinking, okay, really, we need to do something more drastic. Like, conversational leadership is part of it, but what I learned from it is I need to take a bit more responsibility for myself and how I'm going to do things. But if we're going to have the kind of massive change that's necessary in the world, whether we're looking at big problems like the grand challenges of social work, or we're looking at climate change and this real necessity for us to collaborate at scale that we've never really seen before, the word radical is important because it means massive change that largely affects fundamentals and a revolutionary change, right? And so, there isn't anything too particularly revolutionary about showing up and being self-aware, right? We talk about, even if you look at the work about diversity and inclusion, a lot of that is around anti-bias, right? Knowing that you have a bias. And many would argue today that knowing that you have a bias is not enough. It's great. I show up. I know I know what I'm showing up as. I know what my values are. I'm coming here. But what really needs to happen is not just me showing up with this understanding of who I am and how I'm showing up, but me also taking ownership and responsibility of helping other people show up that way too. And there's lots of work around, psychological safety and things like that are really tie into this. But the radical nature to me of communityship, if we're going to really radicalize that concept of communityship, it's a constant multi-directional action. So not just me showing up, knowing who I am and how I'm showing up, but me also actively and openly supporting other people showing up as themselves and as self-aware people. So radical communityship to me is like, being in an outrigger. I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but the first time I ever went outrigger canoeing, it was life-changing. I hurt for days and days afterwards, I'll tell you that. But this idea of every single person in that canoe having to row having to strike the water at exactly the right times, paddle exactly the right times, know when each other were running out of steam, react, turn, give people a break that needed a break, power down, power up. There's so many things, and it all happens so fast. It's this tremendous teamwork that's happening, and it's a constant sensing. There's someone at the head of the boat typically that's kind of paying attention to everything that's going on, or the back. But the idea is that every single person is tuned in, and they're not just thinking, oh, am I doing a good job? They're also tuned into thinking, I can feel from the water that the person 2 seats ahead of me isn't doing so well. How do we adjust? How do we, how can we help that person? Do we need to rotate? And all of these things are very fast, but they're part of the culture of canoeing. So to me, radical communityship is 4 things. The first thing is radical self-awareness, and I'll give extra points to anyone who knows who this man is. Does anyone know who he is? I'll give you some homework then. His name is Nainoa Thompson. My middle son's actually, he's named after him by middle name. But he is a navigator. He's a Native Hawaiian navigator, and he was the first person to bring back the Polynesian tradition of navigating only by the stars. So in the 1970s, the Hokulea is this outrigger canoe that he was the navigator on, and Hokulea went from Tahiti to Hawaii, Hawaii to Tahiti, and they've been back and forth many times. But my mom's brother was actually part of that voyage and part of that crew. And to me, Nainoa Thompson represents a radical self-awareness, because not only is he incredibly tuned into who he is as a human being and how he shows up and what his role is every time he steps on the boat, but he is incredibly tuned into how everybody else on the boat is feeling. That's his job. That's his place. And so, when we think about leaders, communityship doesn't mean that we're going to be devoid of leaders, because the reality is we all live and work in businesses where there's a leader at the head of everything. And that's just kind of how our society works. We can't get rid of leaders, but what we can do is grow leaders and grow employees as people who can lead with this sense of self-awareness and also this value and caring for other people's ability to be self-aware. So that is, to me, that's the radicalness of self-awareness. It's not just showing up as, I know who I am. It's, I know who I am. I know how I'm feeling today. How are you feeling today? And how do we need to adjust and react accordingly? The other thing, the second component of radical communityship to me is radical self-love. And I think I was very scared to include this in any conversations about business or knowledge services, because this idea of self-love, what does that mean? What is it? And then radical self-love, what does that mean? But to me, radical self-love means the ability to really give yourself permission to be proud of, grateful for, loving the person that you are and the things that you are capable of doing. And in radical self-love, that to me is also allowing people to do the same. And to me, one of the best examples I could give was, that's me in the middle there. After I finished running the Honolulu Marathon, I was 40 years old. It was the first and only marathon I've ever run. It took me 5 years to train for that. And that was 5 years of literally couch to marathon. I had never run a day in my life before I was 35. And what I really loved about this collage was the fact that all along those 26 miles, there were people that you can see there that have these signs that had my name on it, and these were all women and men in the community that I belonged to. So to me, radical self-love isn't just about loving yourself. It's also the community that's around you, rallying around you and loving you too, right? So, and being open about it and communicating those things. And I think a lot of times in our work environments, our professional environments, we don't really think about that. Love is not just, it's not romantic love. It's not just friendly love. It really is just honoring and admiring and being open about those things around other people. So, and to me, that is a radical thing that can happen in communities that can shift how everyone in the community really behaves and how well they work together. The third component I'm hoping everyone is familiar with is this radical candor idea, right? Radical Candor is a book that came out a while ago. And to me, this is also something that got sort of touched on when we were in conversational leadership. But this idea that, yes, we can be loving, we can be caring, we can be listening, but we also have the ability to challenge. And I think that that is, you know, in order for you to kindly get people uncomfortable and challenge people in a way that brings the best out of them and the community and the organization, radical candor is required, but so are the other two things I just mentioned, right? You can't, if you're not feeling very much proud of yourself or happy with yourself, it's really hard then to show up to a meeting or a conversation where people are, you know, criticizing you, even if it's the kindest criticism. Bringing radical self-awareness into the situation, you would think, okay, you know, if I am self-aware, I know maybe this is not the time for me to be challenged. Maybe this is not the time for radical candor right now, and having that awareness. And then you as a person in a group, knowing that, okay, this is maybe not the right time to challenge other people based on what I know about what's going on with them. But I think radical candor is important because I think the misconception that some people might have about radical communityship is that it's all about kumbayaing and, you know, and all of that, but it's not. It's really about creating the conditions and the safety in which people can communicate and have conversation in ways that really help move them forward in some way. And especially in a business environment, move people forward in a way that's going to get them to where they need to be. That's constructive, that's kind, but, you know, that's really got a lot of candor to it, right? I mean, that's some of the best conversations you ever have at work are the ones where people are really being able to see what's going on and say them to you. So you can course correct or do whatever you need to do to get everybody on track or yourself on track. So radical candor is the third part of radical communityship. And then the last part comes full circle. The last part of radical communityship is conversational leadership. It is the idea that you have to take all of these components that are in this beautiful egg model that John and Donita and David all kind of put together and agreed to. You know, that this is the practice. This is the way to sort of operationalize all the things that come along with having this radical communityship. And it might seem redundant because communityship is part of conversational leadership, but I honestly think that the practices of conversational leadership, you know, the asking the question of, you know, what do we need to talk about right now, for example, you know, what is the conversation we need to be having right now? That's, you know, that's a way to turn what these kind of practices and values and ideals I've just talked about into something really practical and, you know, something that you can physically do and execute. And then, oh, by the way, the how do we feel exercise we did a little bit earlier, to me, that is practicing radical communityship. And we just happen to be in a community that's very open, that was willing to share everything that was going on beyond just, I'm feeling okay. You know, you all shared very personally what was going on with you. And you know very well that that's not always the case. You know, you could ask that same question and be in a room full of people, especially at work, where people might say, nah, I'm a 5, next. You know, and that's completely okay. Right. But the idea of that, and I think the idea of radical communityship overall is just like I said earlier, making space for people, holding space for people, not just saying, okay, I heard how you feel, great. It's holding the space for people to be a 5 if they need to be a 5 in the moment that you're in and in the conversation that you're having. And then, you know, be able to navigate through that with that kind of awareness. So to me, you know, what's next about operationalizing radical communityship is, you know, talking more about the finer points about, you know, how you would practice those 4 things that I talked about being a part of radical communityship, and how would you practice them in knowledge services settings. So that is not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm saving that for John in May, because I think that, you know, that deserves a lot of conversation about how do you turn all these values that I just talked about into something that you can do? How do you apply this? How do you make this a real thing in your work environment? And how do you lead this way? So that's all I have for you this evening. Sorry, I didn't get to tell you more about operationalizing, but I'm very proud of you for practicing it, whether you knew it or not. And I love that it can be done, and that you all were a great example of how radical communityship can really take place in any environment. So thank you.
So what are you doing in May?
I am speaking at the Knowledge Cafe. I think I'm on for May. John and I talked about that probably in December. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing, talking at the Knowledge Cafe. And hopefully since you know how Knowledge Cafes work, but it's definitely going to be more about other people talking about these concepts, and I'll have a couple of different operational type things to share then. Questions, thoughts,
So
worries?
I have a thought, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So at DAU, I'm in the executive school. I spend a lot of time with our leadership center. And there's always ongoing debate of the difference between leadership and management. And the reality is, if you look around any organization, when you're in, or people you deal with, it's hard to find even one leader. So I know the communityship is all about, I'm looking here at a definition, what everyone in a community exercises leadership. But, right, is that kind of the concept?
Yes, that's part of the concept. But I think it's more that everyone, have a sense of leadership and do so humanely and with kindness with one another. And that doesn't necessarily take you being in a leadership position to do that. That's my take on Henry Mintzberg. You could listen to him for a while. He could talk on and on about it.
Yeah, and I guess what I was trying to make the connection is that it's a struggle to find anybody really that has good leadership. I'm not talking about leading masses, because we always argue that anybody in a room could be a leader, but it's really hard. So how do you do that? How do you enable or assume that anybody in a space can be a leader?
Sure, that's a really great question, because you always contend with that idea that people don't want to be the leader. I don't want that responsibility on me, and I honestly do think that starts with a personal journey for someone. It starts with personal work. I don't think that, I think there are people who show leadership qualities and have leadership tendencies that they either follow or suppress based on where they're at, honestly, for safety, sometimes, for their own safety and protection. But, I do think so much that, leadership, it's that chicken and egg syndrome, right? Like when you have a great leader around you, people tend to follow that leader, and then a good leader begets other good leaders just by example. A lot of times, I know how to behave in this situation because I saw the person who I perceive to be the leader acting that way. But how do you get people to want to be leaders in the first place? I don't know. I think that comes from so much from the individual and what the individual is experiencing in that organization. I mean, I'll use you as an example, Ivan. I think you're an incredible leader. I think that what I saw when I was at DAU with you is that you have this amazing ability to listen, to connect, to, really see what's going on around you. I think that's a hugely important a set of leadership qualities that I didn't see a whole lot of in that environment. And you weren't necessarily, you're not the president of the university, but, I bet you $1 million that you probably know more than most people about what's happening in the organization, and that you do what you feel you can do to help people's experiences there be great. I mean, you certainly did that for me. And to me, I think that that's leadership, that, you know, you can't force everybody to be an Ivan Teeper, but you can, you know, but I think you model that. And I think that by modeling that, people really picked up on that. So I don't know if that's a great answer to your question, but yeah, how do you be a leader? I don't know. I would love to hear other people say how you think that leaders come about.
Can I share something?
Yeah.
As you were talking, I was thinking about my current team, where I have landed in a wonderful location because I'm on a huge team, huge, it's getting bigger, but people who are knowledge managers who help each other every day. And we all are managers because we're managing our own clients in the organization, and we're being trusted to do that, which is something, if you've ever worked in a situation where you're not trusted to take care of things, it's very, very limiting. And it definitely goes against communityship because you're not trusted to get the job done. Now I have a manager who freely says, I don't have time to do all the things we have to do. And these are big, complicated things and they need to be done. So she has a team, she's built a team that does that, and they're willing to do it. And that whole thing about you don't have to draft people for communityship. You see them, it's obvious. And I feel like I'm lucky because my team is like that. Everybody is at a management level, just in their own life, in dealing with their business, their knowledge management, or other communications. And so it actually made me kind of say, you know what, that's what I've got. And my team has met, we meet once a week for just like an informal, hey, how's it going? Or we answer a question like, has anybody ever been on Family Feud, you know? So, but also we're very respectful of each other. And so, and of course that the manager can make that happen. I've been managed by very poor managers. And I think that people who have had that are very good managers because they know what not to do. But I also think the whole idea of communityship, and I don't know if I want to be radical, I would say that, and I have something to say about the self-love too, because I talk to my kids about how their internal monologue is going to tell them that they're bad. They're going to tell them they're not good enough, that they're, you know, they don't have any friends, nobody wants to talk to them. And that whole thing about flipping that around, everybody has to do that. You have to tell yourself, shut up. I did as good as I could. And that was pretty good because I got through it. And find a way to love yourself and recognize that. Because I'll tell you, I spent a long time being very shy and stage fright, and now you can't shut me up. And so you see what can happen. But I think, but I actually really like this concept. I think communities are where we're going because we have to be working together better. And I think this is in line with that. You need to identify and relate to your community, whatever it is, professional or at home or community neighborhood, very important. So anyway, that's my comment, but I can see the value of this.
Yeah. And, you know, the self-love thing, Tara, I'll just say real quickly that, you know, that's a very real thing. I mean, there are chemicals in your brain that are released when you think negative thoughts about yourself. There are chemicals in your brain released when you think great thoughts about yourself. And they have complete impact on how you physically feel, how you show up every day. So yeah, that's a very real thing. It's not woo woo. It's science.
It's just so good to see, Jamie. I just I don't know. I love to see, I guess things could be labels and, the old arose by any other name kind of thinking, but just to see you and to see others presenting like this, I felt like I was watching like a master class in the future of work and the future of being, and it just keeps hope alive for me. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for bringing us together. And yes, I think you're still on for May. So, and we do have our next workshop in April, and Guy will be there. So every workshop we've run, a whole new model has come out of the workshop. So yes, I think by May, we can talk about operationalizing again and see what it looks like after that group practices for a week.
Mhm.
So well done. Love it. No, sorry.
Thanks,
Julie.
John.
Sorry, sometimes the delay, I'm sorry. Jamie, I was thinking about something when you were talking, especially the question at the beginning of how we're doing. And I pay attention to little things because we've been all on Zoom and showing up in conferences, that that personalization is creeping into our language. And where I was the most surprised this summer was, or this fall, I was on part of a conference. I was the humorous guest speaker to talk about Zoom and therapy and how we're connecting. But I was part of a panel afterwards, and the panel was phone only, which I thought was bizarre since we could have had, no, really, because it was like the worst way of communicating. But it was with a gentleman I knew from another conference experience and how I experienced him a few years ago. But he started to talk about the personal, which would never have happened, and how he had to be more engaged with his staff and pause to ask more questions like you asked. And I thought, that is maybe the gift of this whole process. Now, we've been through a lot of grief, a lot of change, a lot of loss, a lot of upheavals, but maybe that'll be the one gift that we've been forced in people's homes and forced to see humanity, in people's situation, that I think that might be something to think about and build on. Now, I will connect with you offline because that topic of conversational leadership really plays with things I write and I like to talk about. I mean, ironically, I wrote a silly book about doing exactly that, but doing it in a very humorous way, about small conversations. And I'll send you the title in the group chat afterwards or after we finish. But I think that is personalizing, and that conversational leadership is about being more vulnerable and being more transparent. And I think that's a huge step in a different direction for how we're raised to think of leaders as all-knowing or very super aggressive. This is about community. So I think you're onto something that's quite important and needed right now.
I love that. I wanted to say, I was talking to someone who is in the military, and they're not in the military anymore, but they work for the military. And they were saying, well, we're all going to end up having to go back to work here pretty soon because the commander didn't feel very commanding working from home, right? As if leadership requires presence, like a physical presence, right? But that is a traditional model. It's the idea of like the overseer, like the person in charge is the one who can watch all things all the time. And what I think this, has taught me, like I was doing some research a little bit about, collaboration and why most people don't like to collaborate. Most people enjoy working in silos because one, it is, easier. You don't have to negotiate anything. If it's you and, one other person, maybe like great. And it takes less time to do. And this value that we have, this agile, got to move fast. Everything's got to be fast, fast, fast. That actually pushes us into a non-collaborative environment, if you really think about it. So, and it pushes us to a non-collaborative mindset because we're so obsessed with getting things done quickly. And I think what I have experienced during COVID and, people working this way is this idea that, what, if it doesn't happen today, it's okay. We understand. This practice of patience and the need to not have everything right now right here, I think that's changed a lot of people and a lot of companies, and their culture is changing because of that. And I think that that will lead to more collaborative environments, more community-based environments. And I think that that's a good thing.
Jamie,
Yes, sir.
could I speak a little bit?
Of course.
There's something that was just said by two people that I want to build on, and I think it will be helpful for us. Julianne, I very much really buy into what you're saying about personalization of these situations, and I can feel another blog coming on, but thank you for that. But Ivan, I want to respond sort of with what Julianne said to what you were saying, because you were asking about a rather specific, or no, you didn't put it that way, but how can we, when we get into operationalizing, what is it we do? What is there a step or two that can take? Now, of course, we can't tell you everything a leader does or a manager does. There are people who've done that long ago, but I do have a situation I can share with you, an example I can share with you, and it builds on what you were saying, Julianne. One of my great mentors, and someone he's been dead all these years, and I still bring up his name in practically every conversation, is Peter Drucker. And he and a lady by the name of Frances Hesselbein, who is still with us, they spent much time together, working together, and Frances and I are very close. Obviously, during the epidemic at her age and my age, we can't see each other a lot, but we oftentimes, when we're able to, we actually just get together for lunch and talk about what Peter said, what she says, what Guy would like to say, et cetera, et cetera. And one example that comes from Peter, and Frances uses a lot too, especially when she's talking to cadets at West Point and places like that. She'll be asked, okay, we've got this situation, and the person isn't asking as a leader, the person isn't asking as a manager, the person is just asking, in the old days, Peter, and nowadays Frances, or any of us, what should I do? How should I handle this? And whenever I present this idea to Frances, she always goes back to the same thing. Remember how Peter would respond. You may have heard of this before. The person comes to her or to Peter and says, how should I fix this? What should I do? And Peter would say, well, what would you do? What do you think is the solution for this? Julianne, to me, that's personalization from step one, wouldn't you say?
For sure.
Yeah, I love that. What would you do? And it doesn't mean you're throwing it back or saying, I won't answer. We'll have, John, a conversation. We are having the kind of leadership where we can say to one another, let's see if we can do this together. But you get us started. I won't get us started. You asked me, but let's let you get us started. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. That's wonderful. Okay, well, Tara, I'll leave it to you to wrap up.
Okay, unmute. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. This was a great conversation, and I'm hoping you've been inspired to come to next month. And we love having you in our community, so please come back and come every month, because this is important stuff, and you're not going to get this everywhere. So thank you all for being part of tonight's presentation. Thank you so much, Jamie, for this wonderful presentation you've given us. And everybody be safe and happy, and look for the 10, I'm telling you. Now you did it. But yeah, thank you for making me feel a 10 tonight, because that's the reason. You're the reason. Thanks, everybody.
All right, cheers. Thanks for the big welcome, and if you're doing.
Thank you for watching KMCDC's presentation. Hope to see you at the next monthly meeting.